There is a 92-foot ocean-going sailing yacht that you can own a piece of, right now, for €1. Not a share in a syndicate, not a timeshare week. An actual stake in an actual vessel, aluminium hulled, built in Germany, 28 meters of expedition yacht that has sailed round the world 8 times and been to Antarctica. Her skipper called her the Bentley of sailing yachts. Reporting has put her value at something like €1.19 million. €1. Now, you are already looking for the catch, and you are right to, and I am going to make you wait for it, because the catch is the entire point of this video, and it is worth understanding properly. I will tell you this much. If you take that euro deal, you are not buying a boat, you are buying a bill. And the bill, on the most recent estimate submitted by a salvage company in Palma, is more than €300,000. That is the story. A €1 million yacht that nobody wants, being offered for the price of nothing, because owning it is worse than not owning it. And underneath it is something every single person who has ever daydreamed about buying a cheap boat needs to understand. A vessel is not an asset. A vessel is a set of obligations that happens to float. When it stops floating, the obligations stay. Her name is Akoa. She was built by Dubbel and Jesse, a yard on the German island of Norderney, and delivered in 1985. She was originally called Licorne. She is aluminium, and not lightly built aluminium. Reporting puts her hull plating at 22 millimeters. If that number does not mean anything to you, understand it this way. A typical production sailing yacht of 40 feet has a fiberglass hull you could put a boot through if you hit it hard enough in the wrong place. 22 millimeters of aluminium is a different category of object. That is the kind of construction you specify when you intend to go somewhere with ice in the water, which is exactly what she did. 8 circumnavigations, voyages to Antarctica, charter work in places most yachts never go. That is a working resume, not a marina ornament. This is a boat that spent 40 years doing the hardest thing a sailing vessel can be asked to do, and did it well enough to keep being asked. It is worth pausing on what a boat like that represents, because it is not a rich man's toy in the way the word yacht suggests. Expedition sailing yachts are a small and specific category. They are built in metal rather than fiberglass, because metal deforms rather than shatters. If you put a fiberglass hull against ice or a rock, it fractures, and fractures propagate. Aluminium dents. A dented boat that is still watertight gets you home. A fractured one may not. They are built with watertight bulkheads, oversized rigging, and systems designed on the assumption that nobody is coming to help. Every design decision in a boat like Akoa is a bet against being rescued. That is what you are paying for. And the people who own them are usually not collectors. They are people who intend to take a boat somewhere genuinely remote, high latitudes, Patagonia, the Southern Ocean, Antarctica, and who have worked out that the only sane way to do that is in a vessel that can absorb a mistake. Her skipper, a 68-year-old German named Klaus Fietzek, described her to local press as the Bentley of sailing yachts. She was owned not by one person, but by several, a group of German partners. Hold that detail. It is going to matter more than the hull thickness, the Antarctic voyages, and the 8 circumnavigations put together. Because on the night of the 19th of January, 2026, Akoa ran aground on a beach on the east coast of Majorca, and she has been lying there on her side in the sand ever since. Where this comes from, before we go on. This is a current story, not a historical one, and it is being reported principally by Mallorcan and German outlets, the Majorca Daily Bulletin, Majorca Magazine, and the German sailing magazine Yacht, with the marine trade press picking it up from there. The skipper's account of the grounding is his own, given to local media. There has been no published official investigation into how the yacht came ashore. That last point is important. Local reporting has noted openly that the circumstances remain unclear, in particular the question of why a vessel of that size was operating that close to shore with the weather deteriorating. Those questions have been raised. They have not been answered by anybody with authority to answer them, and I am not going to answer them either. What is not in dispute is the storm. It was called Harry, and it was one of the more severe systems of a rough Mediterranean winter. It came into Majorca's east coast in the early hours of the 19th of January. Akoa was at anchor, and Fietzek was aboard alone. To understand what happens next, you need one piece of vocabulary, and it is the single most important concept in this entire video. The lee shore. A lee shore is coastline that the wind is blowing towards. If you are anchored off one and something goes wrong, the wind and the sea do not push you out to sea where there is room. They push you at the land. Everything that fails, fails in the direction of the rocks. Sailors are taught to fear this above almost anything else, and the reason is that a lee shore removes your margin. Offshore, a broken anchor chain is an inconvenience. You start the engine, you sort it out, you have miles of water to do it in. Off a lee shore in a storm, a broken chain gives you minutes. His account, as reported, is that he had prepared 2 anchors and had the engine running, which is what you do. When it is blowing hard at anchor and you cannot get to shelter, you set more ground tackle and you keep the engine available so that you can motor forward and take load off the chain when the gusts come. It is textbook. It is also worth understanding what an anchor is actually doing in those conditions, because people imagine a hook wedged into rock. It is not that. An anchor holds by burying itself in the seabed and relying on the pull being roughly horizontal, which is why you let out several times as much chain as the water is deep, so the chain lies along the bottom and the pull stays flat. In a big sea, that geometry keeps breaking. The bow rises on a wave, the chain snaps taut, and for an instant the pull is upward instead of along the bottom. Do that a few thousand times in a night, with a 28-meter hull as the lever, and you are subjecting the ground tackle to shock loads that are enormously higher than the steady pull it is rated for. The sea built. An anchor chain snapped. Once that happens, the situation changes character entirely. A boat holding on one anchor in a rising sea is a boat that is losing. She began to swing, and she ended up lying crossways in the surf, beam on to the breaking waves, which is the worst orientation there is, because every wave is now hitting the whole length of the hull instead of the bow. Fitzek went forward to try to set another anchor, and here is the detail that connects this video to almost every other case in this series. He was not wearing a life jacket. He went onto the foredeck of a 28-meter yacht, at night, in a storm, in breaking surf, alone, to handle ground tackle. And he had nothing on. I am not saying that to condemn him. I am saying it because of how completely ordinary it is. Every single case this channel has covered where somebody went into the water at night has this same line in it somewhere. A woman sent on watch in the Straits of Florida with no life jacket, no harness and no beacon. Crews out of the Fastnet fleet in the water in gear that came apart. It is the most predictable sentence in maritime casualty reporting, and it keeps appearing because putting a life jacket on is a decision made in a calm moment about a moment that has not happened yet. At the point where you actually need it, you are already busy. The chain has gone, the boat is swinging, the surf is on the beam, and you have about 90 seconds to get an anchor down before she is on the sand. Nobody in that situation stops to find their life jacket. The only version of this that works is the one where it was already on before any of it started. An experienced professional skipper, 68 years old, with 8 circumnavigations behind that boat, went forward in surf at night with nothing on. If it can happen to him, it can happen to anybody, and that is the whole point of saying it. He went over the side. By his own account, he was thrown into the water, injured himself, and swam. He has said publicly that he did not think he would survive it. He reached shore and was treated for injuries and hypothermia. He lived. And I want to mark that clearly, because in this series, that is not the usual ending. A 68-year-old man went into breaking waves off a Mediterranean coast in January, with no flotation, and got himself out. Whatever else is argued about this case, that part is simply good. Akoa did not sink. She drove ashore, and came to rest listing in the sand of Playa de San Marjal, near Son Servera. What happened next is the part nobody plans for, and it is the actual subject of this video. San Marjal is not a wilderness. It is a beach on a populated coast. People walk dogs there in the afternoon. Children collect shells 100 meters away. In summer, it is a bay full of swimmers. And sitting on it, listing, with car tires slung over the side as fenders, was a 92-foot yacht. The photographs went round the world within days. She became immediately an accidental tourist attraction, people stopping, taking pictures, staring at a €1,000,000 object lying in the sand like something washed up. And then everybody waited for her to be removed. She was not removed. An early salvage attempt was made and abandoned. The water there is shallow, and tugs could not safely get close enough to work. A salvage company in Palma put together a proper estimate. To free her, tow her round to Port d'Alcudia, dispose of what needed disposing of, and, critically, deploy a preventive oil barrier around the operation, the figure came to more than 300,000 euros. Now the environmental question, which is what turned local irritation into official pressure. Her maximum fuel capacity is 5,000 liters. German reporting indicates that the quantity actually aboard at the time was in the region of 500 liters. I am being precise about that because a lot of English language coverage collapsed those two numbers and reported 5,000 liters sitting in a wreck on a Spanish beach, which is not what the source says. But 500 liters of diesel is still 500 liters of diesel, and the problem is not the volume, it is the container. She is an aluminium hull being worked by surf, day after day, week after week. Aluminium in salt water under repeated impact does not stay intact indefinitely. Every week she sits there, the probability that a tank or a fuel line lets go goes up, and the beach she is on is a swimming beach. That is why the authorities started pressing, not because of what had happened, but because of what was becoming more likely every day nothing happened. So the obvious question, somebody owns that boat, why did they not simply pay to remove it? And this is where a story about a shipwreck becomes a story about paperwork. ACOA was owned by a group, several German partners, described in reporting as an owner's community. When the bill arrived, nobody in that group stepped forward to take financial responsibility for it. The descriptions of who actually owned what were, according to reporting, inconsistent. One co-owner, asked to define his role, is quoted giving a strikingly vague answer, that he was a co-owner, a partner, in some way. There is a 300,000 euro salvage operation waiting on somebody to sign, and the people whose names are on the boat are describing their own ownership as a thing that exists in some way. And then Klaus Fietzek, the skipper, who had nearly died on her 3 weeks earlier, made the offer that put this story on international news pages. He said he would sell his share for €1. He told Mallorca magazine that he did not want to keep it. Reporting differs on whether that share was actually taken up or simply offered publicly. What is not in doubt is the intent, and the intent is the story. A man attempting to hand over a stake in a €1,000,000 yacht for a coin in order to be somewhere else when the invoice lands. That is the reveal I promised you at the start. The price is €1 because the value is negative. Let me explain properly why that happens, because this is the genuinely useful part of this video, and it applies to boats worth €2,000 as much as it applies to this one. A boat is not like a car. If you own a car and it becomes worthless, you can leave it on your drive. It costs nothing to do nothing. Eventually you can pay somebody a modest sum to take it away, and that is the end of it. A boat is the opposite in almost every respect. First, it cannot be left alone. A vessel afloat needs a berth, and berths cost money continuously. Fietzek was reported as saying that mooring fees for ACOA in Mallorca ran to 3,000 to 3,500 euros a month, which is why he had taken to anchoring in secluded bays in the first place. That number is worth sitting with, because it means that simply keeping this boat existing in a marina, doing nothing, sailing nowhere, cost roughly 40,000 euros a year. Second, the moment it stops floating, the cost of dealing with it multiplies. A wreck cannot be driven onto a lorry. It has to be lifted, or dragged, or cut up in place by specialist companies with specialist equipment in an environment where every operation is weather dependent and every day of delay is billed. Third, and this is the one that catches people, the liability does not stop at the boat. It extends to what the boat might do. An oil barrier is not part of removing a yacht. It is part of preventing a yacht from contaminating a coastline. That cost exists because of what your property might leak, and it lands on you whether or not anything actually leaks. Fourth, and worst, you cannot simply walk away. A wreck on a public beach in an EU member state is not an abandoned sofa. Authorities can pursue owners. Environmental penalties exist. Fines exist. The legal exposure attached to a wrecked vessel can substantially exceed the salvage cost, and it does not evaporate because you have stopped answering emails. Put those four together, and you get the central, counterintuitive fact of maritime ownership. Your boat's worst-case value is not zero. It is a large negative number, which is why the euro price is not a joke and not a publicity stunt. It is an accurate valuation. Anyone taking that share is buying a proportional slice of a 300,000 euro liability, plus whatever the authorities decide to add. The rational price for that is not €1. The rational price is that somebody should pay you to take it. So let us actually do it. You take the euro deal. Walk it through with me, because it is more instructive than any warning I could give you. You now hold a share in a COA. Congratulations! You own a piece of a 92-foot expedition yacht with an Antarctic record. Day 1, you discover that you cannot go and look at your boat because she is a wreck site on a public beach and access is controlled. You cannot board her. You certainly cannot move her. You are the owner of something you are not allowed to touch. Day 2, you start ringing salvage companies, and you learn how this pricing works. Nobody quotes you a fixed sum. Everything is weather dependent, and every quote assumes she comes off in one piece. If she has been working in surf for months, and her structure has been compromised, she does not come off in one piece. She comes off in sections, cut where she lies, which is a different and more expensive operation. The 300,000 figure is an estimate from a moment in time, and that moment has passed. Day 3, you contact the insurer, and you find out whether the policy responds. If it does not, if there is an exclusion for the circumstances of that night, or a lapse, or a dispute about who was named on it, then the number is not the insurer's number. It is yours. Day 4. The authorities want to know what you propose to do, and by when. They have been waiting a long time already, and you are now the person who answers the phone. And then you find out the thing that makes co-ownership uniquely bad. Your liability is not necessarily limited to your share. Depending on how the ownership is constituted and what the local law says, a group of owners can be pursued jointly, meaning the authority does not have to work out which of you owes what. It can pursue whichever of you is easiest to reach, and let you argue about apportionment among yourselves afterwards. If the other partners are unreachable, uncooperative, in another jurisdiction, or simply out of money, the person who is easiest to reach is you. For €1, you have potentially bought the whole bill. And this is not a freak event. It is the visible end of something that is happening quietly all along every developed coastline in the world. The industry term is derelict vessels, and the pattern is consistent. A boat ages past the point where the cost of maintaining it exceeds what anyone will pay for it. At that moment, the owner faces a choice. Keep spending on something worth nothing, or stop. An enormous number of people stop. They stop paying the yard. They stop answering the marina. The boat sits on a mooring or in a corner of a boatyard, deteriorating, and eventually somebody else, a harbor authority, a council, a marina, ultimately a taxpayer, has to deal with it. Every coastal jurisdiction has a backlog of these. Florida has legislated on it repeatedly. Britain has it in every estuary. The Mediterranean is full of it. The mechanics of how a boat gets there are worth spelling out, because it is not usually a story about somebody irresponsible. It is a story about arithmetic. A fiberglass yacht built in the 1970s or 80s is, structurally, capable of lasting a very long time. That is the thing that makes them so attractive secondhand and so dangerous to own. The hull outlives the systems by decades. What wears out is everything attached to it. The engine, the rigging, the sails, the wiring, the seacocks, the tanks, the electronics. Each of those has a replacement cost that is largely independent of what the boat is worth. Re-rigging does not get cheaper because your yacht is old. A new engine costs what a new engine costs, and at some point the sum of the outstanding work exceeds the market value of the vessel, often by a multiple. At that moment, the boat is, in accounting terms, finished. But it does not disappear. It is still there, still in the water, still generating berthing fees every month, still requiring insurance that insurers are increasingly reluctant to write on older hulls. The owner is now paying, continuously, to keep an object in existence that they cannot sell, cannot give away, and cannot afford to dispose of. Proper disposal means hauling out, transport, and paying a licensed facility to break up a composite hull. And fiberglass is notoriously difficult and expensive to dispose of because it does not usefully recycle, so the boat stays, and the payments stop. And that is how a coastline fills up. The reason you should care, even if you never buy a boat, is that this is where the free boat trap comes from. Boats advertised at nothing, take it away, it is yours, are not generosity. They are liability transfers. The person handing you the keys is not giving you a vessel. They are giving you their exit, and the moment your name goes on the paperwork, every one of those 4 costs becomes yours. The people who fall into it are almost never fools. They are people who have wanted a boat their whole lives, who have finally found one they can afford, and who have not been told, because nobody in the transaction has any incentive to tell them, that the purchase price of a boat is the smallest number in the entire arrangement. The Akoa is simply the version of this that is impossible to ignore, because instead of rotting quietly on a mooring, she is lying on her side on a public beach in front of 1,000,000 holiday photographs. She is the process made visible. So where does it end? At the last reporting I have been able to confirm, the standoff was continuing. The yacht on the sand, the owners disputing responsibility, the authorities pressing for a resolution and setting out what they wanted, an immediate professional check on the fuel tanks and pumping out if necessary, an exclusion zone around the wreck, and full disclosure of who owns her, who insures her, and what that insurance actually covers. That last item is the quiet one, because the question underneath all of this is not really who owns Akoa. It is what her insurance says, and whether anything about that night, a vessel at anchor in a named storm, close to a lee shore, in worsening forecast conditions, falls inside or outside the policy. If it falls inside, this ends with an insurer paying and everybody moving on. If it falls outside, it ends with a group of German partners and a €300,000 bill and an argument about which of them is a co-owner, a partner, in some way. This is a live story, and it may well have moved since I put this together. If you want the current position, go and look it up rather than take my word for it. But whichever way it resolves, the lesson underneath it does not move at all. I want to finish on Klaus Fitzek, because it would be easy for this to become a story purely about money and paperwork, and there is a man in it. He was 68 years old. He was alone on a boat he clearly loved. You do not call a vessel the Bentley of sailing yachts unless you are proud of her. He had been anchoring her out in quiet bays, partly because keeping her in a marina cost more per month than most people's mortgage, and partly, by his own account, because he did not entirely trust marina security. On the worst night of that winter, he set 2 anchors and kept the engine running, and did what a seaman does, and when a chain broke, he went forward in the dark to try to save her, without a life jacket, and the sea took him off the boat and very nearly killed him. He swam to a beach in January and did not expect to make it. And then, 3 weeks later, having survived all of that, he stood in front of reporters and offered his share of the thing he had almost died for €1, because he wanted to be free of it. That is the most honest valuation anybody has put on that yacht. She has sailed round the world 8 times. She has been to Antarctica. She is built of aluminium thick enough to argue with ice. And she is worth less than nothing, lying on a beach in Mallorca where children collect shells, because the sea put her somewhere that cost €300,000 to leave.